be bold, be heard. Welcome to Unmute Your Mic with your host, Jessica Bell. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Unmute Your Mic.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Unmute Your Mic. My name is Jessica Bell. I am your host from Kansas City, Missouri, and I'm so excited to have you all join me today. Before we get started, if this is your first time viewing, thank you so much for watching or listening to the Unmute Your Mic podcast. And if you are returning, thank you for being a part of the Unmute Your Mic family. As always, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else that you can find a podcast. I'm so excited for our conversation today. I have Marjorie with me, and she is from Canada. And I'm so excited when I get to talk to people, meet new people that I probably never would have came across any other way. So thank you so much for agreeing to be on my podcast. If you could just introduce yourself and let us know a little bit more about you.
Great. Well, hi, everyone. So my name is Marjorie, and I'm from Montreal, Canada. I'm a psychologist by training, and I'm a psychologist who has an expertise in working with moms who have an intellectual disability. And the interesting part of my story is that about 10 years ago, as I was about 15 years into my career, I got into a car accident. My son was 16 months old, and I became a mom with a physical disability, which was very interesting for me, as all of a sudden sort of my personal and my professional life sort of clashed and, got blurry a whole lot. So that's a little bit about me in a nutshell.
Wow. So you said a lot right there. So let's just start unpacking. So first of all, can you talk a little bit about how you chose your profession, your career, because it's a very specific niche. So how did you land there?
Yeah. So I was about 20 years old, and I had to decide what I wanted to do in life. And I really didn't know what I was going to do when I grew up. So I figured that, working with people was something that was always, I was always drawn to. So I decided that psychology would be a perfect sort of program to go into, as I could go into teaching maybe after, or counseling, or a whole bunch of different things if I had at least that as a base. And because I loved, working with people, I was doing a lot of volunteer work, or my summer jobs were with people. And that's when I started working with people with intellectual disabilities. And that first summer job, I met Julie. That's how I call her. It's not her real name. I met Julie, and Julie basically was a mom with 2 young children. And I was supporting her daughter in camp, being a shadow to her daughter. And when I met Julie, I went, oh my God, this is my calling. Forever and ever, this is what I will be doing in life. And I decided that because I was so impressed by her. She, she really wanted to do a great job for, as a mom for her 2 kids. And she worked hard. And sometimes, there was a lot of people staring and not being so nice. But yet, she was a trooper and still going and doing the best that she could. And so that inspired me. And I knew that that's what I wanted to do.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I believe it truly takes a specific person to see that there's a need and decide, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Because I'm sure you can say that this is probably not a career or a passion that everybody feels like they are called to do. And so can you talk a little bit about what are, some of the highs and the lows kind of the position and how you overcome those?
Right. Well, I would say some of the lows, I'll start with that. I'll finish with the positive. Some of the lows certainly is that we're faced, even as workers, we're faced with a lot of discrimination. So not personally, I mean, nobody discriminates against me as a professional, but as we are there to advocate for these parents, we do feel the discrimination and we do feel the stigma, and it's very hard to actually see how it's done and sort of like systemic, because it's really within systems. And often, I mean, part of my job is really it's like a broken record. I have to tell them, and them being, youth protection worker or sometimes judges or lawyers or anybody, in a school system who basically has never met a mom with an intellectual disability before. And I have to sort of like explain to them, it's not because you have an intellectual disability that you're not savvy, that you're not, capable of fighting for your rights, that you're not able to follow a routine or to love your children. But the idea behind intellectual disabilities just really scares, I think, a lot of people in terms of their ability to be able to take care of their children. So that's the low. The high is just, these moms are just, they're definitely my heroes, and they're definitely, people I look up to, because these are some of the most resilient women I've ever met. And if there's one thing that I've taken, out of my job, is being inspired by them. And so one piece that that I didn't mention earlier, I'm a single mom by choice, meaning that I had Thomas through insemination. And a lot of people, when I tell people that, a lot of people will say, well, why did you decide to have like a child on your own? Don't you know it's difficult, and so forth? And to me, it wasn't, because I had seen all these women who have an intellectual disabilities, who for most of them are single parent, and they were like doing it and killing it and doing like a fantastic job. So they inspired me, and in knowing that I had all the resources also within myself to be able to do that. And of course, when I had my accident and I became paraplegic, so in a wheelchair, then again, they inspired me, because I had all their stories in my head. And I knew that if they could do it, well, so could I.
And I think that's so important, because so often people, they go through things and they don't realize how they're inspiring the other people who are watching them. We feel like, oh my goodness, like this is so terrible, or what's happening. But then there are people on the other side who are saying, I'm really inspired by the fact that you can keep going, that you haven't given up. And so I love that you used these mothers that you were working with to kind of help you when you were going through your own individual struggles. And so just a little technically, if you could tell everybody who's listening what it actually means when you say an intellectual disorder, just what that actually means in like a term that maybe everybody doesn't understand.
Yeah, that's a really good question, actually, because you're right. I think a lot of people don't know what that means. And it's very different from one person to the next. So it's not just like one type of like set of criteria that we could all see in other people. So a lot of it is really in terms of learning. So they might have difficulties reading, for example. They might have difficulties with math, so calculating, or sort of higher concepts like budgeting might be a bit harder. What else? I mean, sometimes they're more vulnerable because they don't see when someone, they won't catch the nuance of a social interaction. And so they won't really sort of see that the other person maybe is not so trustworthy or honest with them. So there's many different ways, and again, it's sort of an eclectic type of sets of characteristics, and that could be very different. But for most of it, there's a lot of things that could be supported with. So I talked about sort of budgeting skills, for example. Well, nowadays with you could program a whole bunch of things where your money goes into your account, it leaves the account, pays for your grocery, or it pays for your other types of bills, and it's done, automatically. So there's a lot of things that could be put in place where those limitations, even though they are, potentially significant limitations on some end, can be easily sort of, taken care of a different way.
And thank you for explaining that, because I just want to know, I want everyone who's listening to kind of have kind of a background as to what that means, because I feel like so often people will throw around terms, or maybe they're incorrect terms, or certain terms are used as insults towards people. And so I think it is so important to be educated on what exactly it is, but also to know that it's not just a cookie cutter, everybody has the same, reaction, or acts the same way, or has the same struggle. And I think that goes for all of us. We all struggle with something different, and it may not, we can all have experienced the same life experience, but then have processed it differently. And now it looks different in our lives. So thank you so much for sharing that. And then just on more of a personal note, can you talk a little bit about your accident and just how you overcame that? Because that is such a huge change to have happened to you, like you said, and being a mother as well.
Yeah, that was actually it's definitely one of the most difficult things I've ever faced. Interestingly, when it happened, I was at my happiest of happy, throughout my life. That was like the happiest that I was. I had just celebrated, New Year's Eve with my whole family, my siblings, all our kids at my parents' cottage. So it was, winter for Canadians, so a lot of snow. And I was going back to work in Montreal, so in town, about an hour and a half away. And Thomas, my son, was staying with my parents at the cottage with my sister and my parents. And so I was driving and basically going to work for a couple of days, and then I was going to come back. And, I just got really unlucky. There was black ice, so basically a thin layer of ice that you can't see. And I lost control of the vehicle, and I knew from the first sort of sway that actually I was going to die. And there's a lot of things that went through my mind at that time. And so I thought, it's a pretty good day to die. I was actually, very happy. I just spent like the most beautiful week with everybody. So in a way, it's sort of like saying goodbye to everybody. So I was very happy. Not happy that I was going to die, but happy, in where I was in my life. But then I thought of my son, and I thought, oh, shit, I sort of had my son on my own, and it was to be there for him and to, be able to be a witness in his life and to be able to guide him. And so in my thought process at that moment, I went, shit, I can't die. So I have to live. And I blacked out. I don't know what happened. Obviously, there was impact with a truck that was coming the other way, much bigger truck than me, actually. And that's it. And when I woke up in the car about 20 minutes later, I could feel like my legs were like marshmallows, and they were throbbing a little bit like pins and needles all through the legs. And then I realized that I couldn't feel or move my arms. And I got really scared because I was like, oh my God, like I asked to live to be able to take care of Thomas, my son. If I don't have my arms, it would definitely, being a single parent, make it like too hard for me to handle. And so I turned to God, which is not a person I turn to usually. But I turned to God and I asked that I have, at least my arms back, because I needed to have a little bit of a fair chance to be able to raise him. And my arms came back, and I got like super lucky. So I've got full strength in both my arms, but everything else behind, like below the injury in my back, basically my spinal cord got severed. So anything under my armpits to my toes, I can't feel or move. There's no more movement. So that was a bit sort of like the scary part. Yeah. And then after that, I mean, there's a month, in the hospital. And then there was about almost 5 months in rehab, where I slept there because I had to relearn everything from like even feeding myself, to going to the bathroom, to taking a shower. Then, I mean, there was external rehab. So I went back home, but it was a home that was not adapted. So that was a challenge in itself. Raising a 2-year-old in a non-adapted house where my parents all of a sudden like moved in my house. So we were like way too many adults for that 2-year-old to handle. So he was, very reactive. So that was like another set of challenges. And that's it. But as he grew older, it became easier and easier on the physicality of it. I didn't have to sort of like bathe him the same way, so that was easier for me in that respect.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Even as you were talking and you're sharing, it's just something that it always inspires me when I hear people can go through things that are so life altering, but you're telling it from a place of that you overcame it and not from a place of woe is me. And I know that it could be so easy to fall into that thinking process. And so how did you, as the days were going on and you realized, okay, this is how life is, how did you not give up? What was it inside of you that said, I'm going to keep fighting and make the best out of my situation and not feel sorry for yourself, but actually realize you still have a story to tell and a purpose here? So how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. The first thing for sure, I mean, it's my son. I mean, I'm not sure I would have done so as well if I didn't have him. For the first pretty much 2 years after the accident, I would wake up and the first thought that I had was, shit, I should have stayed in that car, meaning I should have chosen death over living. But then it's a little bit hard to stay in that, very negative type of thinking pattern when you have a 2-year-old sort of calling like, Mama, can you come and get me? So, he sort of like snapped out of it, made me snap out of it every morning. And I mean, you're so busy with like a young child that during the day, I didn't have much of those thoughts. I have those thoughts. They would come and creep in pretty much when I had physical issues, because spinal cord injury is not just not walking. It's also sort of, if I don't control anything below my armpits, it also means that I don't control my bladder or my bowels. And that's not something that, we think about. I didn't know certainly that before I had my car accident. And so, when you become incontinent, for example, because you have a UTI, then it's not as fun. And so that makes, for struggles and makes it more difficult. So those 2 years were quite challenging. I had a couple of great years after that. I had returned to work with the same team, doing the same work. I even had gotten a promotion. But everybody was, in my job, it was a nice little rehabilitation center for people with intellectual disabilities. And so we all knew each other and we were like family. And so everybody supported my return. Everybody supported me as a professional. And that was like just wonderful. And then the whole system changed and became everything big. So we got swallowed up by hospitals, and I couldn't keep up anymore. I couldn't keep up with the work. I couldn't keep up with everything. And then a whole bunch of preconceptions, called ableism. So those kinds of thoughts and theories that sort of say, you're good only if you are, white skin and male would be better, well-educated and rich and so forth. There's like all those standards. And because I was in a wheelchair and I couldn't keep up, I couldn't perform anymore, I couldn't, sort of ride the wave like everybody else, I sort of felt like a huge failure. And that led to a few years of like major depression and sort of like, all the tsunami of emotions that I hadn't maybe digested at the beginning, sort of all swirled up and came over and took over. And that has been really difficult. And what allowed me to sort of like come out of on the other end with a different perspective is that at some point in my therapy, I learned about positive psychology, which is not something that I had learned, when I was studying, certainly not something that we looked at when I was working, and learning about sort of resilience and about, character strength and how every one of us have those character strength in us that we could pull in when we need it, was transformative for me. And that was the beginning of sort of my recovery in a way.
I love that. And can you go a little bit deeper, just for a minute or two, into that, the positive, because I feel like so many of us need to have that type of perspective, but we don't really know how to access it.
Yeah, great question. So I would say the first thing that really drew me to that was that notion that every one of us and throughout the world, it's irrelevant where we're from or culturally or anything like that. We have access to 24 character strength. And this, didn't come out just like, woohoo, we have 24 character strength. Somebody decided that, it was going to be 24. It's actually based from research. So it's a group of psychologists led by Martin Seligman, who around the year 2000 actually did an extensive research throughout cultures, continent, countries, and basically created a survey to try to see like what are the values that would be the most common throughout, humanity. And from those values, there are 6, came 24. And, it even like religion, it transcended religions and transcended everything else. And so for me, that was like really important because I had felt, or the way I was narrating my accident before I found out about positive psychology, I would say I hit black ice, the accident happened to me and my life was over. And then I learned about the character strength and learned love is a character strength, which to me, that was like, yeah, of course I survived because I love my son so much, but I hadn't realized that was actually something proactive that I had said in my mind that had sort of like made, me brace for impact or something, but had prepared me for the impact. And then, spirituality is also one. And the interesting, because I often mention both love and spirituality, because love is actually my signature strength. So the one I use the most. And so I used it in the car accident, but spirituality is actually the one I use the less. And so it's, when I took the survey, spirituality was the one that was sort of at 24. And yet when I needed it, at a time where it was sort of crucial that I gathered all my energy to try to face what I was realizing, I pulled in spirituality. And I mean, you could believe or not believe whatever I believe, that in that moment, after asking 4 times for my arms back and explaining that it was to be able to hug my son, to hold him, to take care of him. And the last time I asked for my arms, I said, I promise I will be okay if I have my arms back. And that's at that moment, my arms came back. like that was telling. And so for me, it was really like, yes, the accident didn't just happen to me. I did things. I was proactive, and I made sure that I would, come out of it in the best way, best shape possible.
I think that is such a healthy mindset to have, and it's so beneficial because, like I said earlier, with everyone having something that they've gone through in their life, no matter how big or how small, it is easy to kind of get into the mindset of like, this happened to me and how unfair was this, and though it may not have been something you could completely control, being able to look at it from that perspective makes it easier to continue on with life and to know that there is something bigger outside of what has happened to us or what we have experienced. So that is so inspirational. And I've loved this conversation. You really inspired me, not just because of anything that you've gone through, but just your headspace and how positive you are, and how you have really dedicated a lot of your life to helping others. And so I think even this conversation is going to be heard by somebody who needs to know specifically that they can continue and they can persevere with anything that they've gone through. And if you could just take a minute or two to speak to that person who is listening, maybe they have come up against a huge obstacle and they don't feel like, I can make it through this, or it's not fair. Can you just encourage them for a minute or two?
Yeah. Well, first I would say, look, I'm really sorry that this is happening to you, and it is unfair. And, I wish it wasn't so, and I wish that you didn't have to go through that. It's part, unfortunately, of the human condition. We all go through events or things or illnesses, whatever, that could be, that challenge us. And it's hard sometimes in that moment to sort of say like, okay, I'll just roll up my sleeve and go for it. But know that you have everything in you to be able to come out of it, and that you call it sort of character strength, that you call it something different. Those resources are yours, and you've done it before because you've had struggles before, and you've used whatever, you slayed the dragons with before. It's there. So it's a matter of remembering how you handled previous struggles to know how you're going to be able to handle this one. And I wish you all the luck, and I'm sending you a whole bunch of love your way.
Thank you so much for that, Marjorie. And thank you so much for sharing just a little part of your story. I know we probably could have talked for much longer, but I'm so glad that we connected and I got to be inspired by your story, because I think it's important for everyone who's listening to know that they can overcome, that there is life past whatever situation comes your way. So I thank you again for sharing on my platform and for being open and vulnerable to talk about, very tough topics.
Thank you so much for inviting me and for having such a beautiful podcast.
Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for listening to another episode of Unmute Your Mic. Marjorie, can you let us know how we can stay connected with you?
Yes. So I have an Instagram account. So you can find me under Mom on Wheels at Ninja Marge. So that's me. And I look forward to anybody who wants to connect.
And if you're watching us live on Facebook or YouTube, that information is going to be down below. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can go to unmuteyourmic.org. There you can find our show notes, learn more about our guest, and stay connected with her. So please make sure to stay connected to be inspired by her story continuously. Thank you for listening to another episode of Unmute Your Mic. As always, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for being a part of this community. Don't forget to be bold, be heard, and continue to unmute your mic. Thank you, Marjorie.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to Unmute Your Mic. Be sure to tune in next time when Jessica takes her mic off mute as she continues her journey to find stories that inspire and uplift our communities.